Good morning, everyone. So let us continue our discussion on the various free radical initiators that are used for carrying out free radical polymerization. So in the previous video, we discussed in detail about the peroxide and hydroperoxide free radical initiators. Okay, we'll continue that discussion. So the second type of free radical initiator that we use is the azo compounds. Okay. Now, as the name suggests, we have an azo group in this particular free radical initiator. So structurally, this is a very common azo compound that is used as a free radical initiator. And the name is basically alpha alpha azo. Okay, and then bis isobutyronitrile. So this is a isobutyl because there is a 4 carbon. Okay, and nitrile. Okay, so that is why this name came isobutyronitrile. Okay, and this is abbreviated as AIBN. So this is a very common azo compound that is used as a free radical initiator. And the major way in which this is produced is by thermal decomposition. So when you heat this particular compound in the polymerization reaction mixture, what happens is a homolysis of these bonds happen. This NCN bond, a homolysis happen. And when homolysis happen, the nitrogen molecule escapes, and as we know, two radicals are formed thereby in the process. So we are generating this isobutyronitrile radical. And this particular radical is quite stable. As you can see, this is stabilized by hyperconjugation, as well as it is stabilized by resonance with this nitrile group. Okay, so that is why this particular radical that is generated thereby is having a very good half-life of approximately 1.3 hours. Another advantage that of using an azo compound is that they can be they can produce these radicals at a much lower temperature than the corresponding, like we know about the benzoyl peroxide. It usually decomposes produces radical only at 100 degrees centigrade, as we discussed in the previous video, and other stable radicals are pretty higher than the 100-degree centigrade. If we otherwise have to lower the temperature, we use certain promoters. Okay, but in the case of azo bis butyronitrile compounds, they produce radicals at a much lower temperature, and they are very stable. So therefore, they have a good half-life. So we can produce polymer chains of good length. Okay. Like in the case of peroxide, we also have wastage reaction happening because of the caging effect of the solvent here as well. So the radicals can combine with itself to generate a tetramethylsuccinonitrile compound. It's just simple recombination of the radical to form a neutral species. This is consuming the radical. This is another way in which the radical is getting consumed. This you can easily understand. Here, what if you want to understand exactly the mechanism that is happening, we know that it's a triple bond here. So one of the bond undergo a homolysis. So a radical is generated on carbon, and this radical on carbon combine to form a double bond. So this is the double bond. Okay, so a radical is a double bond N, and radical is formed here. That radical combined with the one of the isobutyronitrile radical to form this particular bond. So basically, in both this reaction, what is happening is combination of the radical. In this, it is simple combination. Here, you have a slightly different way. You have a homolysis happening here to form a double bond, and then the radical produced on the nitrogen combines with the other isobutyronitrile compound. Okay, so this is the two wastage reaction that happen, but because of the stability of this azo uh, radical that is generated, the radical that is generated from the azo compounds, the wastage reactions are not that significantly hampering the polymerization process. But we do observe these kinds of wastage reactions because of the confinement effect of the solvent. Coming to another type of the redox initiators, if we look into the other type of free radical initiator that would like to look into is the redox initiators. Now, what do you mean by redox initiators? So as the name suggests, you will have certain oxidizing agents or reducing agent donating the electrons. So we have a process of reduction and oxidation happening simultaneously. Okay, so basically, if you look at these reactions, you can see that we have use of certain compounds like this is cumyl hydroperoxide, this is simple hydrogen peroxide, and this is a kind of persulfate. Okay, so we are using certain redox reagents like ferrous salt, okay, here in this process. So you can see when we use ferrous salt, what happens is that it will donate, it acts as a reducing agent. So it will donate one electron to form a Fe3 positive. So when it donates one electron, what happens is that you have homolysis happening here to generate a radical, and the OH radical that is formed, it combines with the one of the electron from the redox reagent to form an ion. So thereby you are generating a kind of cumyl radical here. Cumyl oxy radical you are generating in this particular process. Here also similar kind of thing happens. The ferrous ion donates an electron to form a ferric species. So homolysis happen, radical is formed, and one of the radical combine with the electron to form a corresponding anion. Okay, so here you are using thiosulfate as a redox reagent, so it will donate an electron, and you have a homolysis happening here to generate a sulfate radical, and a sulfate ion is correspondingly formed by combination of the electron coming from the thiosulfate, and thereby radical anion is generated. So basically, in this particular redox initiators, the basic reaction that is happening is one electron transfer reaction. So basically the reagents, the metal ions or the other kinds of redox reagents that you're using, they undergo this kind of one electron transfer onto the species to generate these kind of radical. And like in the case of azo compounds, they can be done at pretty lower temperature. An important advantage apart from the lower temperature of using a redox initiator is that you can control the rate of the reaction, because by controlling the concentration of these redox reagents that you are using here, you can control whether the polymerization should happen at a faster rate. That means you're generating the radical at a faster pace, or you want to generate it at a slower pace or not. So it is all can be decided by the controlling the concentration of the redox species, be it metal ion or it can be certain compounds like thiosulfate. Okay, their concentration you can control to control the reaction rates of that. So these are the basic advantage of using a redox initiators. Okay. Photo initiators. So as the name suggests, photo initiators are basically the ones that are generated as a result of the incidence of the photons. Okay, so the peroxides and azo compounds, as we discussed previously, they are we discussed the thermolysis path. That means by heating you can cause the formation of the homolysis and thereby generating the radicals. But these peroxides and azo compounds can also be undergone a kind of photolysis apart from the thermolysis. Okay. Now, what is the advantage of using photo condition? That means these photolytic condition. What is the advantage of using them? Okay, one of the important thing is then the temperature won't be a factor, because now even if you want to carry out a reaction at a very sub-zero temperature, still that reaction is possible because you can generate the radical at such a low temperature also. But what you have to do is only you have to make a photon of a particular wavelength to strike the initiator to cause the formation of radical. So temperature won't matter when you are using the photolytic condition. Then you have better control over the polymerization process, because now photolysis means this particular photolysis will happen, or the radicals through photolytic pathway will only happen when you make available photons of a particular wavelength. Okay, so you cannot have just a light incident on it and the reaction will happen. It's not like that. You require a correct wavelength. So that means you can control exactly what radical is formed in a reaction process, and thereby you can control the whole polymerization process, and you can easily terminate this reaction also. You don't require anything. You just have to stop the light source and the reaction is terminated. Okay, so we have certain photolabile compounds like these kinds of disulfides. Okay, they can easily undergo, like your peroxides. Disulfide bonds are also very weak, so therefore they can undergo easily homolysis under photolytic condition to form the corresponding alkyl sulfide radical. Okay, and these are your benzoin compounds. Okay, and benzoin also, when you give it a correct wavelength, okay, they can undergo homolysis to generate two different types of radical. And this is your benzyl compound. Benzyl also can undergo homolysis to generate corresponding radicals, which can act in the free radical polymerization process. So basically what you require here is proper compounds which can be easily broken or made to undergo homolysis. Okay, so that is why photolabile compounds we use for this purpose. So even peroxides are also photolytically cleavable, as I told you here, that peroxide not only undergo cleavage by thermolysis, but also they can undergo photolytic cleavage. Okay, so similar to peroxides, you can have disulfide compounds, benzoin compounds, and benzyl compounds, which can undergo photolysis to generate the corresponding radical. So this is another type of free radical initiators that we use for free radical polymerization. Now, another very important thing that you can note here is the thermal polymerization. So as the name suggests, it doesn't involve any external reagents. So, so far, whatever free radical initiators we have been studying, right, like peroxide and azo compounds, and then we use certain redox initiators, okay, and photolytic condition. In all this, we are using, apart from we are using certain external reagent apart from the monomer that we are actually polymerizing, okay, to carry out particular to generate a particular free radical initiators. But in thermal polymerization, if you look into, actually monomer itself uh, actually act as a in situ free radical initiators. That means they undergo certain reactions in the reaction mixture under certain thermal conditions that they generate, they activate the monomer. For example, if we look at the styrene, so this is basically a styrene molecule. They undergo Diels-Alder reaction to form this adduct. Okay. Now, this particular thing, I am leaving it to you. I'll be asking one of you this question: how this Diels-Alder reaction is happening to generate this adduct? You have to show me using that diene-dienophile combination, and to help me understand how this particular adduct is formed. So this will be a question in our live session. Okay. So what happens is that this particular adduct, when it reacts with the monomer, uh, it will undergo kind of cleavage at a homolytic uh, cleavage of this particular pi bond, okay, to generate aromatic system and a radical in the process. Okay, so the radical when the radical is formed, you have homolytic cleavage of this particular bond. So you have a hydrogen radical generated, and this hydrogen radical will combine with this particular styrene molecule to form a styryl radical here. Okay, and you can understand like why this cleavage is happening here, because this cleavage is highly favorable because it is leading to an aromatic form, and also you are generating a benzyl radical which is quite stabilized by the resonance. Okay, and this particular radical formation, like why the hydrogen is combining at this position and not this position, is also easily explainable, because when hydrogen is combining here, you have a radical generated at this point. So that is kind of stabilized by resonance as well as by hyperconjugation through this particular CH3 group. So that is why you have this particular radical. So you can see this monomer is activated by an adduct that is formed as a result of thermal condition. Okay, and so it is an in situ free radical that is generated in the reaction mixture without addition of any external reagent, okay, for that matter. So this type of polymer where the monomer itself is acting as a component that generates or activates the monomer, it is called, those examples would be classified under the thermal polymerization. Often the mechanism, though it is pretty well understood for styrene, but for other cases it is not very well understood. But this is another way of doing the for generating the free radical initiators. Okay, now so here it's says that it's a molecule induced homolysis. So rapid formation of radical by reaction of non-radical species. So there is no radical here. So it's just a rapid reaction of these monomer with itself, leading to certain adducts which can easily undergo radical formation, which in turn can activate the monomer. So this is also referred to as the molecule induced homolysis. So styrene molecule itself is inducing a homolysis, leading to the formation of a activated monomer. Okay, so this is a very good example where we are not using any external reagent for generating the radical. Now, finally, we have one more type of polymerization, and that is electropolymerization. So here you are using electrolysis. So that means you have a polymer mixture and the electrolyte. You have the monomer and the electrolyte, and you dip the electrode and connect it to the battery. So you have reactions happening at the cathode. You have reaction happening at the anode. So at cathode, because of the flow of the electron there, at the cathode, this particular reaction happens. You have the electron accepted by the monomer to generate this radical anion. Okay, and at anode is the place where oxidation happens. So basically, an electron is donated by the monomer to generate this radical cation. So as you can see at the cathode, you are generating a radical anion, and at the anode, you are generating a radical cation. So you can see apart from the radical, you have ionic species also formed in this particular way of producing free radicals. Okay, so that means since these radicals also involves ionic species, so we can um, not only find free radical polymerization happening via electrochemical polymerization, but also ionic polymerization can also be happening. So we can have uh, either happening completely by a free radical or completely via an ionic pathway, or it can be a combination of both happening. Okay, so electrochemical polymerization, we cannot strictly say that they proceed via a free radical pathway because of the generation of these ionic species as well. They can undergo ionic polymerization as well. But since they also form free radicals, that's why we are classifying as one of the source of free radical initiators. Okay, basically, this particular polymerization is used for coating metal surface with polymer film. So in order to protect the metal, sometimes we coat it with certain polymers. So that coating process is usually done via the electrochemical polymerization. So basically the electrodes that you dip in the solution, they are metals. So, and the monomers are in the electrolytic solution. So as the electrolysis happen, these monomers get coated on the metal surface, and thereby you coat the metals, which are your electrode, and thereby do the coating process. Okay, so for that purpose, basically, we use this electrochemical polymerization mostly. Okay, so I hope you are now aware of the various types of free radical initiators that are used for free radical polymerization. Now, in the coming video, we will be talking in detail about the mechanism of the free radical polymerization. So until then, have a nice day. Thank you.